I call this meeting to order. This is a regular meeting of the Northfield Public School Board. Today is Monday, December 9th, 2024, and the time is 6 p.m. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded. The recording of this meeting will be posted on the district website as soon as possible. Welcome members of the community here tonight to observe the important work being done on behalf of all school district stakeholders. Dr. Hillman, we have some items in the table file. Can you update us?
Yes, we have several items in the table file this evening. We have an updated policy 402. We discovered a typographical error, so an updated policy is in the table file. We have some additional gift agreements, additional personnel items. We have an updated substitute pay schedule to reflect new minimum wage requirements. We have two overnight field trip requests included in the table file as well. That's the table file for this evening.
Okay, thank you very much. If there are no objections, we will add these items to the agenda as we move forward. Okay, is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Okay, moved by Jeff, second. Can I have a second? Okay, Rob, thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. We're moving on to our public comment section. We do have one community member signed up, and I have an additional statement on making comments tonight as we are doing our truth in taxation presentation. So bear with me while I read these. Tonight, we have two opportunities for public comment. In conjunction with our regular school board meeting, we have the Truth in Taxation public hearing. At this time, those who have signed up to make public comment at this regular meeting will do so. After the Truth in Taxation presentation, Northfield School District taxpayers will have an opportunity to ask questions or make comments regarding the Truth in Taxation public hearing presentation. Robert's Rules of Order is used to govern the conduct of this meeting. And now I will read our regular public comment guidelines. This is an opportunity for residents, business and property owners, parents, guardians, students, and employees of the Northfield School District to address the board. All comments to the board must adhere to the guidelines set in place by District Policy 206 regarding public comment. This is not a time to debate an issue, but only for the board to hear your comments. You are prohibited from making comments about specific students, staff, and administrators. The board respects and values input, but when it relates to specific individuals or a specific matter, this input must be heard by the appropriate personnel, including the building principal or superintendent, and not during an open meeting of the school board. You will be gavelled out of order if your comments are not in compliance with these guidelines. Please address the board from the podium. After being recognized by the chair, identify yourself, and if you represent a group. We require that you limit your remarks to 3 minutes. You're not allowed to yield your time to another person, and it is expected that members of the public will address their remarks with civility and respect. Personal attacks by anyone addressing the board are unacceptable. The board has allotted up to a total of 30 minutes for public comment at regular school board meetings. I will now begin to call those who have signed up to speak in the order in which they have signed in. Vice Chair Corey Butler will be monitoring the speaker's time. He will signal each speaker with the time they have remaining at 1 minute, 30 seconds, 10 seconds, and 10-second intervals. Please make your comments as brief as possible, but no more than 3 minutes. Okay, we have Andy Turn here. You can come up and make your comment.
Hi, good evening. I got a
Put the mic down toward you there. Thank you, Andy.
good evening. I have here a handout. Everybody got here that little handout. That was from a presentation a year ago in December. I just updated it a little bit. I made it a little bit more readable. You look at it, on the right you have the performance standards which are accepted in this country. On the left hand you have your buildings. And my little comment was regarding, I was wondering what's going on in this town? What are the colleges doing with their buildings and how they're performing? That was my question. And when you look into it, I put in some comments about it, where they are actually. And I found an interesting thing, and that was actually the Regency Hall at St. Olive, which is actually doing pretty well when you look in there for their performance, they were actually surprised that it was doing that well. They were thinking about the twice of the energy, almost twice of the energy usage, and they figured out, oh, it's actually doing better. What that means for you, when you have a better performing building, you have less of investment costs and you have less of maintenance costs. And this is what that is all about it. And this should give you a little bit a guidance where we are and where you have potential to improve your buildings. My hunch is about it, and I learned actually also on the school board election on that thing, we want to have better performance of our buildings. And when we start the reimagining project, we should look at this and set actually standards. One thing actually came also out is that New York SCA is a large organization which does actually the rebuilding of their schools in New York. They have 1,800 buildings under them, and they build about 40 new schools every year. They have a very good programs and very good information out in the internet you can access actually. So what we can do to get that better? Well, we can do better envelopes. We can avoid thermal bridging, and we can specify the performance for our building, which would actually make sense, right? And stick with that. And the lack of performance actually caused the non-performance, in my opinion, of the Greenvale project we built just a few years ago. I hope this helps a little bit to make a decision. And if you have questions, I'm open for questions. Thank you.
So much, Andy.
Any questions?
I'm sorry, this is just a listening time. So thank you for sharing. Right, we only had one person signed up tonight, so we'll move on to our announcements and recognitions. And tonight we have a very special recognition. I'll turn it over to Dr. Hillman.
Yes, this evening, I am proud to share a little bit to begin with about our sesquicentennial minute. We're honoring Noel Stratmon, and we can't honor Noel Stratmon without also honoring Lois. And so Noel and Lois are here. Thank you for being here to let us recognize you. So to begin with, I'm going to read just a couple of passages from the book that we've been using during the district sesquicentennial year, City of Schools by Bruce Caldwell. And I'm reading from page 141. At the May 20th, 1980 special election, voters also selected 2 school board directors in a closely contested horse race among control data manager Noel Stratmon and rural farmers Harold Paulson and Phil Parsons. Paulson and Parsons, as expected, swept the 5 rural precincts, but Stratmon won both city precincts to win a seat along with Paulson in the remarkably close finish. Stratmon had 1,319 votes, Paulson 1,318 votes, and Parsons 1,254 votes. Stratmon's victory marked the beginning of the longest tenure in board history. Stratmon has served uninterrupted from 1980 until the present. So Noel Stratmon has been an amazing public servant for 44 years, elected 12 times. And he did not run for re-election this year, and this meeting would have been the end of his 12th term. And we are here to thank Noel for his service. I also want to thank Dr. Rob Hardy for filling in for Noel for these last several months as Noel's been recovering with some health issues. We all know Noel is dedicated to Northfield in all aspects. And something I'm really appreciative about Noel is that he always followed up with a very kind word at just the right moment. And Noel is a model of exemplary public service. And Noel, we have a couple of special things for you tonight. And so the first is Dr. Hardy, Northfield's first poet laureate, has composed a special poem in your honor, Noel, and he's going to read it now.
Noel, when I sit here in front of everyone, I lose my self-importance and think only of the importance of the work we do together. You have shown me this way of being present, of being centered without being the center, that so much can be accomplished with a steady hand, a soft voice, and a generous heart. Elected and re-elected 3 times before I moved to town and 8 times since, you have always been the anchor and the sail, rudder and compass, both the wind and the calm when it was needed. Each year, new words are added to the dictionary, and definitions change with changing times. But you have remained the definition of service, of duty, and humility. If there is a word for the greatness that comes of raising others above self, that word must be Noel.
So Noel, to use one of your phrases, you've touched all the bases, my friend, as a member of the board, and the entire community is grateful for your service. And it gives me great pleasure to be able to announce that tomorrow, December 10th, 2024, will be Noel and Lois Stratmone Day in the Northfield School District for their outstanding service and dedication, tireless effort, and constant support for the Northfield School District. So I have a couple of, I'm going to bring these over to you, Noel and Lois, and while I go over to give them, if board members want to make comments or share thoughts with Noel, and then I know Noel has a few things he'd like to say as well. We'll get a few pictures as well. So if board members, while I'm heading over, want to make any comments?
Nice. What, Amy?
Noel, I don't have a poem for you, but I do have so many fond memories of working with you on the school board. And I must say, I will always remember your colorful language, but I don't mean swearing. I don't remember ever hearing you swear, but you always had a way to turn a phrase to produce a picture in my mind and really make your point. And sometimes you would even have stories behind it where you tell a story and you would get to your point. And it was just such a wonderfully diplomatic and memorable way of explaining how you felt about things. And I always call them Noel's parables because that's what you were doing. You're teaching us a lesson while telling us a story. So thank you for the time I've been on the board the last 8 years to serve with you. And thank you for everything you've done for the students in our district over several generations.
Thank you, Noel. Nice. Thank you, Amy. Anyone else want to make a comment? Okay, Jeff?
Hey, Noel, Jeff Quinnell here. Thanks for your service. Spent many years sitting by you, over at the school and stuff. And I just, one of the things that when I think of you is just your ability to be able to give perspective over the many years that you're on the board and kind of help us as board members to compare that to what's happened in the past. And I hope to be able to add some more perspective to that from what I heard from you and things just going back, because we want to build a future as much as honoring the past and the tradition too. So I thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Anyone else want to make a comment at this time? Okay, Jenny?
Noel, unfortunately, I only was able to serve with you for just a tiny glimpse of your 44 years of service. So I don't have that strong common bond as some of the other board members do with all those fond memories. But I do have a little memory of when we were chatting, and you have raised 2 sons, and that's kind of what I do share that common bond with you because I'm also raising 2 sons. And I remember you were giving me advice because I was asking about raising them, and I didn't have my notebook and my pens with me though, so I remember getting home and immediately writing down all of that advice as much as I can remember anyway. And I appreciated that so much. And I just want to wish you happy 44 and also happy 44 to Lois too, because she was obviously standing by you and supporting you for those 44 years.
Very nice. Share something, Ben?
Sure. Thank you, Noel. I didn't serve with you long either, but you rightly told me when I sat next to you over on that side of the table that you couldn't hear me talking. So it was good coaching advice. So hopefully you can hear me now. And I've taken that advice every meeting. Like, what would Noel say? So I'm just, trying to be as articulate as possible. But thank you for your service. You know, I think that's a long and storied career, and any community is lucky to have somebody that serves for 44 years. So thank you, Noel.
Anyone else? Corey?
Noel, just want to say thank you for your 4 decades of service to the community. Obviously, that's a untold number of years that you've committed to our community, and it takes a baton being handed off among 7 people over that time, and hopefully we can carry it forward and continue to serve our community for the betterment of our students and everyone else who lives here. So thank you.
And Noel, I've only known you a short time as well, but you made an impact on my life. And I appreciate you for that, for your kindness, for your words of encouragement, and most of all, for believing in me. So I'm just glad that our paths crossed. Would you like to come up and make some comments? Anybody else?
I think it's fortunate that God has suggested the knees give out first, because you need the brain longer than the knees. So my advice, Lois, where are you? Come on now. We thank you for all your generous comments. It's been a great ride. And when Jane McWilliams asked if I'd be on the board, consider running for board, I didn't expect that I was going to be here all these years. But I met a lot of wonderful people, a lot of opportunity. So wanting to share something, but keep it short, I'll quote Ogden Nash. It was one day in September when, brightly I remember, I was walking down that street with tipsy pride. Not a word did I gutter when I lay down in the gutter, and a pig came up and lay down by my side. Not a soul we were disturbing as we lay there by the curbing, when this high-class lady came and I heard her say,
You can tell someone who boozes by the company he chooses.
and the pig got up and slowly walked away. Thank you so much for your generosity. It's been a great experience being with you. And rest assured, we will continue to read the newspaper and listen to the radio. So don't mess things up.
It has been a privilege for me to be able to support Noel for all of these years. We are so proud of the school district, the excellent education our young people are receiving here, and of the people that work here. Yes, we have 2 sons that graduated from here. They went on to be exemplary students in college, and are now excellent young men.
And never did they live in our basement, which is a clue that graduation from Northfield is a good way to go. Thank you all.
Hold that, Lois. Flip this over here. Photo. All right.
All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, one more time. 1, 2, 3. All right, wonderful. Thank you.
I'll give that, Mary will carry this on for you. She'll help make sure you guys get out. Goodbye, Lois. Thank you. See you later. Been a good run.
You said you put me in the middle of the meeting.
Thank you.
I won't let that happen.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Lois.
That's lovely. Thank you.
One more part of that sesquicentennial, and I just did the quick math. And Noel Stratmos have served for 30% of the time that the school district has been in experience, or in existence. So Noel, I know, 30%, that's pretty great. So thank you, Noel and Lois. And while your service is ending, you will still be part of our hearts. Thank you.
Okay, we are on to item 5, which is items for discussion and reports. Oh, yes.
Well, I hate to say anything after that wonderful experience, but I think we have big news from, that's one of our people who have been in the theater department, the director of the theater department for many, many years, over 25 years, and also very involved with the community. This year has received the Northfield Living Treasure Award, and that's Bob Gregory Bjorkland. So anybody who's worked with him, and there's a lot of students who've gone through, have had the blessing of being able to have him direct them over the years. So very exciting news.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else have any comments or recognitions? Announcements, recognitions? No? Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, truth in taxation presentation for the payable 2025 property tax levy and fiscal year 2024-2025 general fund budget revision, followed by public comment. Director of Finance Val Murderstorff will review the levy and recommend revisions to the 24-25 general fund budget. The general fund budget revision accounts for legislative impacts, final audited data, settled contracts, and benefits, and the public is invited to speak following this presentation. The final certified levy for 2025 is $27,740,323.16, representing a 26.4% increase from the prior year. The increase from the preliminary levy to the final levy includes the initial debt payment for the reimagined Northfield High School bond. Welcome, Val.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here. So we are going to talk a little bit about the Pay 25 levy, and then I will jump into the revised budget. And I have to say, this is not always the most exciting topic, but feels like really a bummer to follow that excellent scene. So, all right. So as you know, we don't start any presentation without talking about our strategic plan. Our levy is 25% of our budget. And so when we talk about preparing every student for lifelong success by developing critical thinkers who are curious and ready to engage in our society, the budget and the resources we have is how we accomplish that each day. And so a budget is really making sure that we are prioritizing our dollars to match up with our strategic plan. And this levy is a very significant component of that and how we work through that every day. So the levy cycle, I won't go into too much detail. As most of you have heard me say, the property tax system in Minnesota is one of the most complicated in the United States. So lucky me, I get to explain it to you. Really, our process in the district is we certified the preliminary levy in September. And now we're finalizing that. As you will see as I go through this, we saw an increase, and there are very limited reasons why you can increase between the preliminary and the final. And one of those is a voter-approved referendum, which all three questions passed on November 5th. And so that is the reason for that increase. But really, we are certifying a dollar amount. There's a common misconception that if our tax base goes down, that the district sees less money, and that's not the case. We certify a specific dollar amount, and that is spread through a very complex calculation across our tax base, which includes the entire 178 square miles of the district. So we have property in Rice, Dakota, and Goodhue counties. And Rice County is obviously our home county, and they take our final levy and then they distribute that across that calculation based on all the property values in the different classes. There are 5 major classes of property and 50 subclasses, actually. I looked it up today. I had an estimate of 40 in my narrative, so there's some more specific information for you. But it is complex, and there are a lot of factors that play into the dollar amount that actually shows up on your tax statement. The other thing to note is some governmental agencies have quite a bit of leeway in what they can choose for their levy. That is not the case for the school district. The vast majority of our levy is state authorized levies or voter approved. It is extremely regulated. And so we can't decide that we're going to be in a tough budget situation and increase the levy just to help us out. It all has to be either voter approved or through a formula through the Department of Education. And so this talks a little bit about all of the different, they set not only the tax policy, but the different levy authorities. So we have the max voter approved operating referendum allowed by law for 10 years with the inflationary factor. And then there's lots of miscellaneous other levies that are included in our calculations, which we'll talk a little more in detail about in a minute. So property tax changes, there are several things that can impact the dollar amount that you pay. So obviously the voter approved referendum, the bond passing in November is the significant change that we're seeing from the preliminary to the final. Because several of our formulas are enrollment based, changes in enrollment can change the amount that we're levying for. There is also up to 3 years prior for adjustments. So start to finish when we're doing the preliminary to when it's very, very final is nearly a 5-year process. Legislative changes can also change it dramatically. Changes in market values, you can see in the graph on the right there. In 2022, our total market value went up 15.6, and in 2023, it was 11.7. This data is a year behind on the levy cert, just the way the timing works for when we're certifying things. But those are pretty significant jumps that obviously coincide with what we've heard from our community, that market values are increasing. And then in addition to the change in market value for your property, any changes in class rates and things like that can impact it, as well as levies by other taxing jurisdictions. So we are one of the taxing jurisdictions. Obviously, the county and the city and some other miscellaneous entities also play into that total. So the levy for us covers 3 different funds in the district: the general fund, the community education fund, and debt service. So this, for the general fund, is 25% of our general fund revenue. Like I mentioned, that's a very significant portion, and we are grateful for the partnership in this community to support the additional dollars to help keep our programming strong for every student. The debt service, we are required by statute to levy 105% of our debt payments for the coming year. So every year we pull together the schedule based on our principal and interest payment schedule, and then we enter that into MDE's system, and they levy 105% of that. It also includes voter approved and state authorized, which we talked a little bit about, and we'll talk some more when we get into the detail. And really the levy fills the gap from the chronic underfunding that we've experienced at the state level with our general formula. So in terms of the summary, overall, our authority is up about almost 5.8 million or 26.4% over the prior year. The preliminary levy was 21,836,963.45. And our final certified is 27,740,323.16. Now, again, the only difference between the preliminary and the final is that all 3 questions of the Reimagine Northfield High School passed. And so this is including our first year of levy for the debt service for the bond that we'll be talking about probably at the second meeting in January. So it's anticipating that bond issuance, if that makes sense. And so this is just a percent chart of how that 27 million breaks out. So this looks a little different than it did last year. So our debt service fund is now 33%, which is the same as our referendum. Prior, the referendum was a much bigger chart of the pie, but with the increase in the debt service, that is now 33% for both of those. General fund others, about 25%. That includes our operating capital, long-term facility maintenance, other post-employment benefits, our building leases, and local optional revenue. Capital is 8%. That's the voter-approved capital projects levy. And then the community service fund is about 1%. So this is a lot of numbers on a small slide, so I'll try to talk through them. There are three different categories and ways we're required to talk about the levy. So the first on top is just by fund. So of the 27.7 million, 18.2 million of that is the general fund. So that's 25% of our general fund budget. Community ed is about 412,000, and then the debt service you can see was the significant jump from 3.3 million to 9 million to make sure that we have funds to pay that first year of bonding for the high school reimagine project. The second breakout is really just voter approved and other. So 20.2 million of the 27 is voter approved, and just shy of 7.5 million is other. Other means that they were state authorized formulas that we were able to access. So we saw a 48% increase in our overall voter approved, which is again a testament to this supportive community. I had a dollar amount in here or percentage. I want to say it was like 70, probably already passed it. 73%, I think. Yep. 73% of our total levy is voter approved. I feel incredibly fortunate to work in this district. The support we have in our community is second to none. The last breakout is just by tax base. So the referendum market value is primarily the tax base calculation that they use for our operating referendum. And net tax capacity is the calculation for basically all the other formulas. So there's a slight difference basically in the how agricultural property is taxed for referendums versus all the other levies. And so that was pretty similar. The increase in the net tax capacity is really where that debt service payment shows up. So this gives you a little bit more detail about the general fund and all the different authorized levies that are included within that. Again, most of them are relatively consistent year over year. We talked about this in September, but the other post-employment benefits increase was really related to some additional teacher retirements and the severance payments that are associated with that. The long-term facility maintenance decrease was really a change in the legislative calculation. And so we are getting additional state aid. So it's not that we're getting less money, it's just shifting it from a local levy to a state aid. And then the adjustments for up to 3 years, that went down about 500,000. And again, the pay 24 had a pretty large adjustment for our referendum related to enrollment. So that was actually cleaning up from the 22 school year where we had a very conservative enrollment estimate during the pandemic, just because there was a lot of uncertainty about where students were going. And so that was an additional kind of extra revenue we got in to catch up from 22. Community ed had about a $27,000 increase. Again, part of that is some of their formulas are tied to the basic increase that the general fund gets. Some of it's related to a census increase, and then other just statutory calculations. Excuse me. And then again, debt service, which we've talked about several times already, but that increase is just related to the bond that we're going to be issuing in the spring. And then just for some additional context in terms of the levy overall, including pay 25, our average over the last 5 years is a 7% increase. Overall, very reasonable. If you look at the prior 5 years, it's 1.8% increase. And so overall, with the declining enrollment, it's been pretty stable. Really, the only increases that you see in pay 23 was the voter approved capital projects levy. And then pay 25 is the Northfield High School bond. So now we'll dive into a little bit about the budget. So there are lots of things that can happen from when we're estimating our adopted budget in the spring to today. You're going to hear in just a little bit about the audited information from the prior fiscal year that's now finalized. And so we know where our fund balance landed, we know where our revenue expenditures were, and we can take that information and roll it forward and compare it to what we had adopted. Our October 1 enrollment is no longer a projection, so we can analyze that and see if we feel like we're on target or not, or if we need to change that. We have settled employment contracts and staff hired in those employment contracts, so we can make sure that the salary budget is up to date. We've received a few grants since the spring that we need to make sure are included in the budget. We've renewed contracts, we've had some benefit changes, and so all of those things come into play when we're talking about the budget. I'm just gonna grab my water so I don't cough all night. Okay, so for enrollment, overall, I was actually really pleased. I got pretty nervous when we had our initial September, October enrollment report, and it showed it was way under, not way under, 20 or so under what I was originally projecting. But when I put it into the model, what I will say is overall, I'm only reducing it 0.8 in terms of our weighted calculation that's in all of the formulas, but there's quite a bit of adjustment between the grade level bands. So overall, enrollment stable. We're just kind of cleaning up some of the transition and things from the adopted to the revised that just weren't quite lining up. So overall enrollment stable. The estimate's basically the same in terms of all the calculations for the revenue, so that's a good place to be. In terms of revenue, I think it's like a $4,000 increase, which is flat and stable in my opinion. Really the biggest change that I want to call out is the switch between state and federal sources. And so if you recall last spring, when we talked about the adopted budget, we talked about doing a one-time switch that's allowed with our special education federal funding to use it to pay for our tuition billing costs. And so what that effectively does is move it from federal to state. So we're using federal dollars to pay state tuition bills. And there's a one-time, basically, not a one-time. It allows for an increase in that special ed reimbursement rate in the next year. But in the year we did it, it was a $1-for-$1 change. And so that's what that switch is. Again, not more or less revenue, just shifting the category in which it sits in. And then the local sources increase was really just an increase in our interest revenue projection. Again, lots of data on one slide, but I felt like it was easier to see that this is the same data set, just broken out in two different ways. So the top one is by program. So where are we spending it? And then the bottom one is by object. So how are we spending it? And so you can see there's quite a bit of adjustment in the expenditures. And really that is related to mostly related to things that we saw with our audited financial data that we needed to roll forward. So there were I would say some significant benefit changes throughout, in addition to just our standard process of increasing or analyzing our health insurance premium, the Benefits Advisory Committee recommended a 10% increase. We're still seeing some challenging claims experience with our health insurance. And so a 5% of that 10% increase is picked up by the district. And I think I included in my narrative just for perspective, because 5% doesn't sound like a lot, but our total health insurance budget's about 6.4 million. And so a 5% increase, that is $320,000 for just health insurance. So that's a significant increase. In addition, I talked about the teacher severance payments with our OPEB levy. That is a trend that we're anticipating to continue. We have a veteran staff, and so we're expecting some of that to continue, which results in some increases in our other post-employment benefit offerings as they access their contractually required benefits. What other things did I have on here? Special ed transportation was another big one that we saw last year, was significantly higher than what we had budgeted. That can be incredibly volatile depending on the students and where they need to be transferred and when they need to be transferred. We had a pretty solid number of care and treatment transportations in the past year, which, depending on where they go, can result in one student being transported daily for several days. And so that was just an increase over what we were expecting. We've also seen increasing special education numbers year over year. And so we're not anticipating that to slow down. And so we're just adjusting to the budget to make sure that we have a reasonable amount to cover that. On a positive note, we did or are changing our work comp carrier January 1st and saving about $100,000 in premium. So I was pretty excited about that. Work comp's been increasing pretty substantially the last couple of years. So I will take $100,000 savings any day of the week. Those were kind of the big changes. There were a few staffing things that we were just making sure were aligned in the different programs. But overall, we ended last year with about 1.6 million more expended than what I budgeted. And so I want to make sure that this budget is appropriate for what we are anticipating moving forward. Again, last year, you'll hear in the audit, we also had additional revenue to come in and offset that. We actually grew our fund balance last year, but just making sure that we have the right amounts in the right buckets to get through the rest of the year. So this is where you pull it all together. One of the things that was most interesting to me when I pulled it together was just analyzing the fund balance. And so I included a chart in the narrative, which I realized I totally clipped off all of the headings or labels. So it was maybe not as helpful to you as it was to me because I knew what it was saying. But for 23-24, we had a surplus of 1.3 million, which was more than what we had originally projected. And I had projected ending at 4.14 unassigned fund balance. So when you look at that, it says 13.83. And of course, initially when I look at it, I'm like, oh, we're under 14. That's not what I planned. But if you look at the actual unassigned number, the 8,365,731, in the budget that I did last year, I actually projected that we would end with 8,335,545. So we ended with an additional 30,000 in unassigned fund balance, more than what I had projected, which is great. But because our expenditures were 1.6 million higher than I projected, it's 13.83 instead of 14.14. So unassigned fund balance is right where we expected, but our expenditures were higher than anticipated, which means the percentage is less. So then we roll all that forward. The proposed budget obviously had a goal or had us ending at 14.35. But again, we're increasing those expenditures and by adding those expenditures, we're obviously going to have a deficit now, which was not originally anticipated, of about 592,000. And so we're projecting to end at about 12.17%. So the next step for this process is really an updated financial forecast, which will come in January. And so we'll be able to forecast. There are some significant expenses coming up that we need to be planning for, which I'll talk about more in January when I present that. But this will obviously set into motion a plan for us to know where we need to be. The declining enrollment is still a factor. Last year was kind of the blip where we had a slight increase, but we are expecting it to decrease again and continuing for the next couple of years. So really, I want to say that the culture of stewardship, obviously that's one of the strategic commitments that was on my second slide, but it has given really the district a sense of financial stability that is not commonplace in school districts in Minnesota, in my opinion. And we continue to operate from a position of strength. Having a projected 12% fund balance is probably several districts' dream to have projecting 12%. And for us, again, it's below the fund balance goal, but that means that we can be planful. We have funds and resources, but we can choose to be planful and proactive in how we respond to that rather than just reactionary. So that was a whole lot of information, but I will gladly answer any questions you have at this time.
Thank you, Val. Thank you for your presentation and all your work to help us understand. I'm going to open it up right now for the district taxpayers who want to ask questions or make comments regarding the Truth in Taxation public hearing presentation. Is there anyone who wants to come up and make a comment or have a question about that Truth in Taxation presentation? Is there anybody?
Nope, nobody on this side.
Board members, do you have any questions about the Truth in Taxation presentation? Amy?
First, thank you for taking a lot of numbers and condensing them down into something that's still very complicated, but yet has a chance of being understood by people like me. So I really appreciate that. I just have a question about something you were explaining to us on the revenue revision page. You mentioned tuition billing costs, and I didn't know we charged anybody for tuition. So if you could just clarify for me what
Sure.
that is, that would be great.
So we don't actually charge anybody for tuition. The tuition billing is part of the special education calculation. So for all of the students that we enroll in the Cannon Valley Special Education Co-op, that's a charge back to the district that comes through the tuition billing system. That's what the state calls it. So if we are the resident district on record, any students that are attending, special education students attending other districts, go into a statewide calculation that we end up paying a portion of, if that makes sense. So for Cannon Valley Special Ed Co-op, we're paying 100% of their costs because they're residents and it's a joint power arrangement with the 4 districts that we're part of. There's lots of other calculations depending on the student and disability and how they're placed and where they're placed and why, but it's all part of the special education statutes and who's responsible to pay for what parts of their education.
So is that something that the state handles at their level then? So we're not giving money to Cannon Valley Special Education. Instead, the state is taking it from us and giving it to them.
That's
Okay.
exactly how it works. Yep. So that's why it's a flip, because the tuition billing is a reduction of our revenue. So whatever I'm projecting for special education revenue is this total minus tuition billing. And so what we effectively did was we paid it with federal dollars. And so it's reducing the amount that we lose in special ed, or that's taken off the top, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that helps a lot. Thank
Okay.
you very
Yeah,
much.
you bet.
Anyone else? Question or comment? Corey?
Hi, Val. Just want to thank you and your finance team for all the good work you do. Appreciate both the levy portion and the budget discussion tonight. Obviously, 12.17 is not where we want to be and is below our goal of 14 by 2 points. So I look forward to the January forecast and some of the discussion we'll have from that, and likely some difficult decisions in the future. I did want to just elevate and highlight a couple things you said during the levy, just for general knowledge or general, reassurance to the community that your
Sure.
friends and neighbors voted 73% of this levy over the last several years, right? So I think that's very
Yep.
important. It's not just the one from November, it's 2 prior levies as well. Is that correct? So there's 3
Yes.
on the books right now?
Yep.
So while,
Plus the other voter approved debt.
correct.
That's also
So
part
while
of
we
it.
look at 26.4% increase this year, which is significant, no doubt.
Yep.
It was overwhelmingly supported by the community. And you had mentioned that in the 5 years prior, that it was 1.8% outside of that. So again, looking at the very complicated formula that we have, and I think it was 2 out of the last 5 years. And this year would have been a reduction in our levy had not there been a positive vote across the
Yep.
board. Is that fair to say?
It is.
Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Corey? Okay, I'm going to go to Jenny and then Ben.
Thank you, Claudia, and thank you, Val. I just actually have a question regarding something you mentioned, not so much the report itself.
Sure.
On the workers' comp savings, was that realized because of an annual report for application for renewal, or because our modifier went down, or do you know?
So we actually, we got the renewal from our current carrier and then actually went out and sought another quote from a different vendor. We've been with the same work comp carrier for several years now. And so the premium that they were offering was $100,000 less than our current carrier. So we're switching carriers. So not necessarily our mod rate. I don't know if they set their own mod rate or how that works in terms of the calculation. The information I had was that it was their initial premium was $100,000 less than our current carrier.
And during those annual renewal applications, you usually seek out quotes from other companies, or just?
Not always. It depends on where they're at. We have, and this is not my area of expertise, so you can help me out if I'm wrong, but we have a broker and then the actual carrier. And so we have used the same broker, actually the same person, and kind of followed her because she has done an excellent job depending on where she has been. But the carrier has been the same for quite a while. And so that was a recommendation that we look for something different. And there's lots of work behind the scenes and what that means for our human resources team and that sort of thing. But obviously that was well worth the savings that we're going to experience.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, Ben?
Thanks, Val. As always, quick question on, and maybe you can take us through these complex tax calculations, but I think you show that slide in terms of the estimated market value going up kind of 22 to 23 and, double-digit increase there. But then when we looked at the levy prior to this year, obviously it's going up because of the referendum, but those increases weren't of that same percentage or proportion. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between, like, I'm a homeowner, so from a residential taxing standpoint, like as my estimated market value goes up, like what's the general relationship between the district's levy and that value? Does that make sense?
Sort of. Hopefully my answer will make sense. So our overall market value is the entire amount that we have to spread the district levy over. So in a year when we'll pretend we're back at the preliminary levy where it was basically slightly declining, almost flat, this market value increase of 11.7 not only is property value increases, but also includes any new business valuation. And so what it means is our dollar amount that was the same from the prior year to this year is spread over a larger dollar amount. And so the preliminary levy tax impact calculation was actually a reduction of your school district taxes across the board, across all categories, if I'm recalling correctly, because there was additional market base, but our levy didn't go up in a percentage that exceeded that. And so most people saw a reduction in their school district taxes. Now, obviously, our final levy looks a little different. And so those numbers will be different on their final tax calculation that they receive. We are working to get updated tax estimates, but we haven't received those just yet. So we can share that out once those are received. But that's the general relationship. If our market base is growing, but our levy is relatively similar, you should see a reduction in what you're paying for the school. If the tax base isn't going up significantly, but our levy is, obviously that's going to be a more dramatic increase. But obviously lots of factors that play into all of those numbers, but that's kind of the base assumption.
Sure.
Is
Right.
that helpful?
It is. No, and I think you said something at the beginning that I think it's helpful just when we think about this in general, that we certify a specific dollar amount. It's not sort of proportional to the
Yep.
value of the taxable market in the district overall. So
Yes.
sometimes I think those things get confused, at least in my mind. So
Yes.
that's
Yep.
helpful.
Yeah.
2 more questions. I'll make them quick. But there's a decrease in the long-term facility maintenance from 24 to 25. What was the driver of that?
So that was actually a legislative shift where they increased the equalization factor. And so we're actually just getting more state aid. So same amount of revenue, just more coming from the state versus the levy.
Good to know. And then looks like we landed the plane right on the runway in terms of revenue side. It was good to see that the enrollment matched. I assume that was because we picked up more in the kind of 6, 7, 8 kind of higher grade level. That's part of the formula, isn't it? If I remember correctly.
Yes. So there was a kind of a swing. The kindergarten number from last year was lower than what I had in our revised budget. And so that part got cleaned up. And so that's why there was like a 30 student decrease. But we picked up some additional 712 kids that have the 1.2 rating. So overall, that weighted calc was 0.8 less, which is
Good.
really good.
Yeah.
Still declining, but
Right.
really good in the terms that it didn't go backwards and we had less revenue than anticipated.
And so when we look at what are the top 3 bullets then for the proposed versus revised, because we're about $1.5 million different there. So remind us kind of what those top 3 drivers are.
For expenditures, benefit, so both health insurance, other post-employment benefits due to some anticipated severance payments and retirements and access to those benefits, which those are leviable. And so we'll see that revenue
Later.
coming in the levy in future years. It's just not a clean in the year you earn it, here's the revenue. And so that's at least a sort of positive. There's revenue coming. Benefits were the big one. Special education transportation was the second big one. And then just some kind of staffing cleanup changes to make sure we were lined up correctly.
And the special education transportation val is the same as the OPEB, where we'll
Yes.
get that money back from the state, but not until another fiscal year.
Correct. Yep. The special education state aid is paid on prior year expenditures. So we will see that come through. What we had extra in 24 will actually come through this year. And then that kind of just keeps
Kind of lags
rolling
by a year.
forward. Yep.
So of that 1.5, how much would we expect to make up in the future of that difference? Maybe that's not a great way.
I know what you're trying to say. I would say probably almost $1 million, 900,000 to $1 million of that was 2 of those formulas probably.
Gotcha. So
So,
we would expect to see
but-
that revenue in subsequent years. It's just
Yep.
that we have to pay for it now.
Yeah.
Okay. Hopeful. Thank you.
Questions? Okay, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks for your report.
Yep.
If I recall correctly, I believe the middle school was built for about 41 million in 2001, and we did a 20-year bond, and that is off the tax rolls or coming off the tax rolls to the people paying taxes. What will they see, or how is that reflected in anything, and how does that come into, your current situation for just reporting on that? Because that's a big deal if people wanted to pay on that anymore.
Yep. So The final debt levy for the middle school bond was actually on this levy. We're paying it off in February, but it's only like a half-year payment, and so it was pretty small. The biggest change for that was actually on the Pay 24 levy, where we saw a pretty substantial decrease in our debt service, but that was offset by the capital projects, the voter-approved increase for the capital projects levy. So overall, the levy looked like it balanced, but there was a pretty big shift between debt service and general fund. And so had we not had that voter-approved increase, there would have been a substantial decrease in the debt service taxes that then would have been offset by the Pay 25 increase with the high school. Does that make sense?
No, not really, but I understand. And yeah, all right, thanks.
Yes, so overall, the bulk of the debt for the middle school fell off on the Pay 24 levy. And so, but there wasn't necessarily a reduction on your tax statement because the voter-approved capital projects levy offset that.
So in other words, to Joe or Jane, public, when they're looking at that, you're not really going to see that because boom, we're adding on.
Yep, the timing of those two helped offset each other, so there was not a significant increase when the capital projects levy came on, because the debt was falling off at the same time, but it's all about the timing.
Good. Thank you. Anyone else? Question or comment? Okay, thank you, Val.
Thank you.
Item B is our fiscal year 2024 audit results and presentation. And we have Ben Johnson with Clifton Larson Allen LLP, who will present the results of the 23-24 fiscal year audit, and a copy of the full audit report is available upon request. Okay, welcome, Ben.
Hello, thank you, Claudia, and thanks for having me here today. Yes, so my name is Ben Johnson. I've been with CLA for about 5 years. Probably in the past, you've had Craig presenting. He's the principal that I work with at CLA most closely. And I believe on last Monday, he presented to the 4 of you on the middle here. So that was a little bit more detailed than we're going to get today, but I'll be open to questions at the end here. So we are issuing a clean audit, meaning there's no internal control deficiencies noted, yellow book issues, Minnesota legal compliance issues, or single audit issues, which that's the federal dollar audit. Of the 40 or so audits that Craig does, 8 of them have this clean of an audit with no findings across the board. And only 2 of those have an in-house accounting department where they don't pay or have an outsourced accountant help them. So that is a really big deal and is a testament again to the financial operations going on here. So thank you, Val and Matt, for your leadership. And then based on the size of the district, you guys have when any district has over $750,000 of federal expenditures, you need to have a compliance audit over some of those expenditures. And just on the size of the child nutrition program, which is your, food service and federal dollars there, that's the program we audited. As I mentioned, there's no findings there. We're kind of looking at contracts and vendors and basically making sure those dollars are spent responsibly. And yes. Okay, this slide is breaking down our general fund, and the columns are kind of like your unassigned general fund, and then your state restricted funds, which is made up of a lot of different sub-restrictions, and those are very restrictive on how you can spend those dollars. And then there's 2 columns for your capital expenditures, operating capital being kind of smaller scale, textbooks, curriculum, upgrades, and then your long-term facility maintenance obviously would be your large purchases. But with the small exception of the operating capital, this is overall a really good year with all fund balances going up steadily. Your COVID, this year we kind of see COVID ending to a large degree in terms of fiscal year 23. There was big COVID projects still ongoing, but a lot of those projects have dropped off in fiscal year 24. But that's made up by the fact that your general education aid is going up, ALC's up, your operating capital is steady, and then your long-term facility maintenance, basically no major projects ongoing, so that's going to go up with your levy and other revenues. The next 3 slides will break down basically a 5-year trend over how these fund balances have gone. So your general fund unassigned fund balance is up from last year due, like I said, to that general education aid is significantly increased from fiscal year 23. Your COVID aid and COVID expenditures dropped off from fiscal year 23. And then this is a pretty good year for investments as well, which your investment interest income doubled over fiscal year 23. As Val mentioned previously, this is 13% of your expenditures and is your unassigned fund balance, which is healthy compared to a lot of districts that we see, but it is under that policy that you guys have set, which is, we see policies all kind of in that range. That's a normal policy. This slide, we're switching gears now over to the food service fund balance. This is a pretty typical graph from that we see in terms of that fiscal year 22 went way up as COVID happened, and that program was heavily supplemented by grant dollars. However, in fiscal year 24, those meals were more subsidized or free from paid for by the state. You guys were budgeted to break even here, and a lot of districts are trying to spend this fund balance down because, like I said, this is a pretty common trend, and it's just like a lot of districts have made, upgrades to their equipment and things, but now they're running out of, how are we going to spend this money? So that is something to continue thinking about, is how are you going to spend this food service fund balance down? Because I wouldn't say it needs to be as high as it is here. And then this graph shows our 5-year trend of your community education. And from my experience, this is your graph that looks the most unique, because a lot of times community ed is what really struggles at different districts, where it is really close to negative and trends down significantly. So you guys have very healthy fund balances in your community education, and it is declining a little bit from fiscal year 23 to 24, but that is a really amazing graph, honestly, to see. I think there's expanded programming and increased participation going on this year, but this is a great graph to see. Now we're switching a little bit towards your enrollment trend, which over the last 5 years has been relatively steady with a slight decline overall. But from fiscal year 23 to 24, there was about a 40 student increase. And sounds like that's obviously on all of you guys' mind moving forward as well, and fiscal year 25 is going to drop again. Okay, these last 3 slides are breaking down, or are showing 2 different things going on here. So the dark blue is showing your 5-year trend on your expenditures in this case, administration, or your administration expenditures per student. And then we're comparing our dark blue 2023 number, because we're waiting for finalized numbers. We're comparing that number, the 2023, to the state average and the similar sized district averages. So looking at our expenditures, our administration expenditures per student, those are steady, slowly increasing, but your expenditures compared to similar districts and the state averages, so we're looking at that, again, 2023 number, though all have this are true, is less. So you're spending less on administration per student than similar sized districts or the state average. And this, contrary to the other slide, is showing your expenditures on your regular instruction. So your expenditures on education, you're spending more per student than similar sized districts or the state averages, which both of those trends is, and also this final one showing a similar thing, is something that we as auditors see as a really good sign of how a district is run, because it means you're spending less of your money on your administration and more of your money on your students. So that last slide was showing your regular education expenditures, and this is showing your special education expenditures per student, which also steadily increasing, and you're putting more of your money towards your students and your special education than the rest of the state and similar sized districts. And I think that's the last slide I have for you. So my contact information is here, but are there any questions you have for me at this time?
Thank you so much, Ben. Board members, any questions Ben can answer at this time? Questions or comments? Ben?
Sure. Thanks, Ben. Informative, and we got a deeper dive from Craig last week during our finance committee meeting, so I appreciate the recap. Excellent work. So if 2 districts passed with any outside help, how many districts have a Val Murdisdorf? That's the question. No, I think that, I think this is just reflective of kind of what we were hearing and going through the budget. I think Val and Matt, and the fact that we're so efficient in terms of, comparatively in terms of our administrative costs, I think just is a continued good reflection on the district and why I so enjoy being a board member here. So thank you. And just by way of context, I think, what is this, our 6th, 7th year of a clean audit? 8th, 6th? Yeah, so, right.
Say that again, please.
6.
There you go, a 6-year streak. Yeah, no, so I think that just highlights the excellent work that we do, and, gives hopefully the taxpayers and voters continued confidence in the fact that we have seen an increase in, the referendum for the Reimagine project, that certainly funds that will be well handled and well overseen. So thank you again. And thanks, Ben.
Yeah, thank you.
Amy?
Thanks, Ben, for the report. And I'm just trying to understand the special education instruction cost per student. That's over all the students, so that's divided by the total number of students, or is that divided by the number of special education?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is per all students, is how this calculation is working at the state level here.
Okay, and that's helpful to know, but it seems like the percentage of special education students varies between districts. So I'm not sure what the comparison numbers actually tell you, because some districts might have a lot more special ed students, or, percentage wise. And
yeah, I'll add, I guess, additional context here of this is a interesting graph in terms of, yes, some districts heavily use their, like special education co-op or something. And so like this graph is less comparable to other districts for multiple reasons, because there's different solutions that different districts have.
Okay, yeah, that's the clarification I needed, but I also have a comment, and that's, I want to comment to Val. First, amazing, Val, truly amazing. And I have to say, I've been here longer than 6 years, Val, and I know it's been 6 years of a clean audit, but it's, in my mind, it's been longer than that, because you had clean audits before, except for a technicality. So if you could discount that technicality, that you were required to have a dirty audit because of that technicality, how many years would it be, Val?
I do not, I don't know what's on. I don't know that off the top of my head, but I can certainly go back and.
Please do. Please, I would like to know that number.
Okay, I can do that.
Hi, Ben. Thanks for being here. A couple questions. So just piggybacking off of Ben's question about the percentages. So of the CLA clients, you have 40 school districts. You said 8 had clean audits. 2 of those have in-house staff. So 5% of your clients had in-house staff clean audits. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to verify that because that's a lot easier to digest. 5%, so that's high praise, obviously. And then obviously 6 consecutive years with an asterisk of maybe more, even higher. I have a question about the comparison ranges. So we are on the high end of our peer groups of 2,000 to 3,000, 9,999. Is that is that an industry standard, or is that CLA selecting what audiences to put us in since we're at the very high end?
Yeah, this is like state numbers. These are state reports. These are state classifications.
So the state would identify us in the 2,000 to 4,000.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously having the state number is great to average out because you can see we spend a lot of money in our classroom and less so on our administration. And I think we are talking, walking the walk when we talk about being good stewards of our money. And I just was curious how we would pair up against 4,000 to 6,000 if that's the next peer group. But obviously having a state comparison shows that story anyhow.
Yeah. I mean, and we can, build these slides however you guys as a board finds most valuable. So if that is something in the future, like we can definitely add that column in as well. And so.
No, that certainly is not required on my behalf. I just, when you're at either the high end or the low end, you like to be kind of in the middle. So it feels like it's a closer comparison.
Yeah, I can actually run that data and share it later this week. We used to be in the 4,000 to whatever the range was. And once we were consistently below 4,000, we decided to switch it just because that felt more appropriate. But I'm happy to show it both ways.
That's not necessary. I was just curious kind of how the process goes. And again, compared to the statewide, we're still looking pretty positive with how we allocate our dollars. Thank you.
Anyone else comment? Question? Dr. Hellman? Oh, yeah, very good. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
Okay, item C of our sessions and reports is Director of Instructional Services, Hope Langston, presenting the 2024-2025 Comprehensive Achievement and Civic Readiness Goals.
Ooh, look at that. I'm a little shorter. Hi, everybody. I was last here at the end of October, and I'm glad to be back to present these new goals, the Comprehensive Achievement and Civic Readiness Goals, otherwise known as CACR. As Val said, we start every meeting with our vision and are grounded in preparing every student for lifelong success by developing critical thinkers who are curious and ready to engage in our society. And really, these goals and our benchmark goals speak to that. So as I alluded to in October, the 2024 legislature made a shift from World's Best Workforce, WBWF, to CACR. And that involves some changes in goals set by districts. And here's just a little information from the MDE site. And really, they're looking for a more holistic measure from each district. And this really will be measured on goals we set this year. So this is a little bit confusing because you won't receive the actual report to the fall of 2025 because World's Best Workforce and now CACR are reporting on the prior school year. So I hope that's clear to everyone. So that part hasn't changed. But again, encouraging us to look at a more holistic view of our students. That is the focus of this legislation. And then they delineate what role you all play. And really that's having the board establish an advisory committee. And for us, that's Northfield Forward, formerly known as DPAC back in the day. And so that group gives us feedback and participates in planning on many different things. And so there were 22 board committee members present at the November meeting, sorry, and they helped to discuss how we might measure these goals this year. And they're looking to have districts use a multi-year plan. And we know change doesn't always occur as quickly as we would like it to. But we had some robust discussion around each of these goals at our meeting, and I'm happy to share those with you tonight. So there we go, 22 Northfield Forward members talking about these 5 goals. They were given a little sandbox to play in. The parameters were that any goal metric had to be cost neutral, so we weren't going to add any new assessments. We weren't going to spend any more time assessing students both academically or social emotionally. We're going to use what we have. And then this is key because we had to do a little research after this meeting, but we need to be able to efficiently measure whatever it is that we are going to use for each goal. So as you just saw in Val's report, we are lean administratively, and that means we need to set up structures and systems that allow us to measure accurately, but measure efficiently. So that was one of the other parameters that the group needed to use when they were generating ideas. So these are the 5 CACR goals in place for this year. And you're going to see that 4 of the 5 look very familiar. In fact, they were in World's Best Workforce. So all children are ready for school. Racial and economic achievement gaps between students are closed. Students are ready for career and college. All students graduate. And here's the new one, that we prepare students to be lifelong learners. Now, think about this. Districts all over the state have been studying how they are going to measure each of these goals, and we can locally develop the metrics that we use to measure these particular goals. So as you've sat through many World's Best Workforce reports over the past decade, we've tried a bunch of different things. We talked about that at our Northfield Forward meeting, and again, I'm excited to share with you the ideas that were generated that night. So all children are ready for school. We, as you know, are now required to give the FastBridge assessment to our kindergarten students. And really what it is 5 different subtests that measure foundational reading skills that research says are good predictors of future reading ability. So we talked about that. And then we also talked about, and this one had a lot of traction, preschool screening rates. So that would be at what age do our incoming kindergarten students get screened? And we know this is important because if a student needs intervention, the earlier they get it, the more successful they can be, and the response can be quicker. And so we looked at this. And I want to just let you know that preschool screening rate data from MDE is a little bit like the attendance data conundrum we found ourselves in last spring, where our local data didn't exactly match what MDE was reporting publicly. And when I dug into our use of preschool screening rates, because I believe locally we keep very good records of who's screened and when. But when I actually started digging around the data analytics site for MDE, I couldn't get there. The last publicly reported data set is from the kindergarten cohort of 22-23, so those kids are currently 2nd graders. I couldn't get the data to match, and it was a variance that I was not comfortable with. So I, of course, go to our expert, which is Chris Nessett, who knows all, and we started digging into it. And here's where it becomes very messy, is that we have out-of-district students who come to Northfield to be screened. We also have Northfield kids who might go to Faribault to be screened or might go to another town to be screened. And we're not super clear, and we couldn't get a super clear answer from MDE on how those kids are factored into this metric that's publicly reported. And I get a little hesitant to report something that's going to be public like this metric with a piece of data that's local that does not match what's on the MDE. So for this year, we just thought, you know what, until we can explore this a little more carefully and really understand what's happening with MDE data, we're going to stick with the FastBridge results. It's efficient, it's accurate. We know it measures literacy and math readiness. So we landed on this one for this year. That's not to say that we cannot revisit preschool screening rates. It's just that in the time frame of the November Northfield Forward meeting to now, we just don't feel comfortable with the publicly reported data. So we're landing on 72% of incoming kindergarten students next fall will meet the grade level benchmark on their early reading FastBridge assessment. This year we're at 70%. That's our baseline. We know that there's a consistent and united effort to continue to prepare kids. We just had our pre-KK meeting that we have every December with all the area preschools and the kindergarten staff, and everybody loves this data. They want Erin and I to come back and report on their cohort level data, but they are invested in preparing kids, and they want to know what this new assessment looks like, and so that's where we landed for kindergarten readiness. All racial and achievement gaps, economic achievement gaps between students are closed. We've seen this before. We have been working on attendance, as you all know, and the Northfield Forward had generated some other ideas, one of which was after school activity attendance, because we know that kids who are engaged in activities that appeal to them will generally have higher in-school attendance. In any case, we decided to stick with school attendance because of the efforts that we are making both through that state attendance pilot and the work of our family engagement navigators and their cohort level work with specific students and families. So we are going to continue to try to meet this goal. This truly is a multi-year goal because it is hard to move the needle on attendance in a single year. So we have seen improvement in this, and we want to see this through and know that the work that we're doing is making a difference. So that will look the same for this year. All students are ready for career and college. As you recall, we used to measure 8th grade MCA results and ACT scores for the last few years. We had a lot of discussion about this. Jeff and Jenny were there along with Matt about what does it mean to be career and college ready. And we also have some really great special education parent perspective on that team saying, hey, we want to see our students represented in this data. So where we landed was really making sure that our high school students are on track for graduation, and that means credit attainment. And you can see in the gold box to the right of the circle where our baseline semester 2 data was for last year. So that's our starting point. We want to reach 95%. And really, this would apply to every student at Northfield High School. So we feel comfortable that every family and student can see themselves represented in this goal for readiness. And we're excited to see the work that the high school is doing to increase those numbers. Again, this was a robust discussion, so I really just wanted to make you aware of all of the great ideas that were generated that night. 8th grade students completing a career interest inventory, AP and PSEO course enrollment, what we formerly use ACT and grade 8 MCA, and then again, keeping in mind what kind of post-secondary opportunities for students who access special ed services and how can we include them in that measurement. So these were just some of the things that our committee talked about that night in small groups. Then goal 4, all students graduate from high school. We did actually talk about course completion rates as a possibility for this goal as well, but we decided we would stay with graduation rates. We know that this data is clean when it comes to us from MDE. It is a year delayed, but they actually give us a graduation roster and we see student by student what their outcome was. And that's really allowed us to clean up our system. Whereas when Chris Nessett and I tried to do that for the preschool screenings, couldn't come close to that. So this is a good metric, and we're going to stick with this one for now. You can see the 2023 rate as our baseline, and we're going to continue to try and hit that 95% mark. And now we get to our new goal, preparing students to be lifelong learners, which aligns nicely with our vision. So we talked again quite a bit about this goal. The additional proposed metric that we did not select were the social emotional competencies. And as you know, we do have our social emotional screener that we give twice a year to all our students. And so in some ways that makes sense, but kind of tying that to a lifelong learner goal seemed like a little bit, it was an indirect path, let's put it that way. So we were looking at other options, and really people were talking about, like, if you are a lifelong learner, you are passionate about something, right? You want to continue learning, you like learning, you will try new things. And so we kept coming back to really participation in not only activities, but some kids work outside of school, kids taking elective courses outside of the graduation requirement. So the graduation requirement, for example, calls for 1 art class, but somebody's taking 3 art classes. But once I came back and started to talk to Chris Nessett about how, remember, one of our parameters was efficient measurement. We were talking about where this data lives. And right now, this data lives in multiple systems in our district. And so it is not efficiently gathered, especially the work metric. The high school, as part of some surveying that they used to do of all students a few years ago, pre-COVID actually, they used to ask kids about their work participation. So we want to take year 1, which would be this year, to look at how we can, as a system, pull all of that information into one place so that we can efficiently measure it, because we believe this is important data to have on our kids. And we want, a global view of participation and work experience in one place. And so that's where we landed for year 1 is, okay, let's look at what our structure is for doing that. And we'll be able to report back to you about where the progress that we made in pulling all of that together in one place so that we can have an accurate measurement of it. I think there's a strength of Northfield. There's a lot of opportunities for kids, so we want to be able to report it accurately and have it reflect what students are truly doing outside of the classroom. So that is our year 1 goal. That would be a multi-year goal, because obviously we want 100% of our high school students to either be participating in activities, doing outside work, or taking elective coursework. We're kind of see how that goes this year for baseline data. So we may tweak the broadness of that measurement for year 2, but again, year 1 is creating the process for pulling that data. So you know, we've been up here for a number of years saying, hey, we are streamlining our goals. We want to streamline our goals. We don't want so many goals that people lose track of what it is our focus areas are. So I thought it was important to say, like, hey, we have district benchmarks that are student-facing benchmarks. And I wanted you to see the alignment to the CACR goals, because it's nice to have either complementary goals or goals that are streamlined. So on this slide, you can see the CACR goals on the left, and where we will get those results. And then on the right, you can see our district benchmarks and where our data source for those outcomes. Because I think you may notice that the CACR goals, aside from kindergarten, don't have any academic testing measurements included in them, but they are reflected in our district benchmarks. So we feel like this is a good comprehensive view of what our students are doing. And they're just happen to be measured in two different places for the district. Now I'm ready for your questions.
So much, Hope. Okay, board members, any questions or comments? Rob?
I just have a question. Thank you for your report, by the way. I have a question about two of the things, the on track for graduation, the grade 12 for the year that you have 23-24, it's 97%. And then the next goal is about actually graduating, and that's also 97% for that year. So is that the exact same data point? So is on track the same as actually graduating that grade?
I think that's a great question. And on track means, and I think we said, if I go back to that, so that was semester 2. So that would have been grade 12, so grade 12, so the class of 2024. And we will get their graduation rates in, it could be anywhere from February to April of 2025, depending on how MD does processing the data. So I would expect that the graduation rate would be very close to that for Northfield High School. But remember, we, for our graduation rate, look at the district rate, which includes the ALC and Northfield High School. So yes. Did that answer your question, Rob?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I had a similar question. So the way I would phrase it is, are we like double dipping? Rob called it same data point. Are you saying it's not?
Well, I'm saying that this was, so we want at least 95% of each of our high school grades to be on track. Whether or not we should include 12th grade in that, probably not. I was giving you the baseline data for where we landed last year. But you're right, that should reflect what our graduation rate is. I think there's probably some other things that happen in that graduation, because it's not just about credit attainment. You also have to meet all the requirements to graduate in your course selection. So perhaps we take 12 out, and just do 9 through 11.
Okay, thank you. Rob, did you have a follow-up? No? Okay, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just put it more bluntly. It seems like we're using the same measure for two goals, right? Graduation rate. Is MD okay with that in terms of this CACR approach? Because don't they sign off on the whole, at least if that follows the world best workforce model?
Well, I think that we can revisit how we word this goal. So really what we want to make sure, and really the whole purpose of the discussion around this was, we want to intervene on students as early as possible if they are not on track for graduation. So I think it's probably to clarify that, because I see your point, we just remove grade 12 because they would be in the graduation rate. And this would really be 9th, 10th, and 11th graders.
Does MD publish, I guess I would imagine they do, what other districts look at for these same goals as measures? Is that something that's publicly available?
Actually, they don't.
Really?
So what you have to do, which I did, was just go, every district is required to post their reports. But this is the first year of CACR, so nobody's got a CACR report posted yet. However, I did see many districts having this same discussion that we are having about what they should use to measure these goals. And so that's really where I did a sample across the state so that the Northfield Forward Committee members could see a sample of what other districts were doing. But there is no central reporting of CACR or World's Best Workforce goals results.
Okay, well, maybe that's an idea for MDE, but
It is a great idea.
this one here is not a new goal, correct? The career and college readiness?
No, the only new goal is prepare lifelong learners.
Okay, so any interesting, I mean, when you looked kind of across the peer districts, if you will, however you want to define that, but any ideas stand out specifically for this career and college readiness one? That
I will tell you, and I think it relates to some of the parameters we set about no extra assessment, no extra cost, efficiently measured. People use test scores.
Sure.
That was probably the most common metric that I saw.
Okay.
And the reason why we looked at the first 4 goals again is because honestly, we've been doing World's Best Workforce since 2013. And we thought it was a good time to just pause and ask the Northfield Forward group for feedback on how we are measuring those goals, and really to relook at every single one of them as part of this shift to CACR.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I certainly respect the work of that group. I do think there's probably value in differentiating a measure, right, between those 2 goals, because it seems like we're maybe in the same place for 2.
I think we removed grade 12.
Yeah, and I appreciate that we would see it that way, but I do think it's 2 distinct different goals. One is the lagging indicator, right? The piece about how many students graduated. This is the leading indicator. And I think that if we can agree that we believe that the requirements that we have for our students are robust in a variety of different areas, we have maintained through a lot of different things a comprehensive high school approach with all sorts of selections for our students that are not usual for a high school our size. And so this measure of are people on track, right? So if they are completing what we expect for them in each year leading up to graduation, even if they really dovetail together, I'm comfortable with that. And the reason that I'm comfortable with it is it is intending that if you take advantage of the variety of courses that we have at the high school, the electives that are required, et cetera, that if you are on track to get the number of credits you're supposed to get in that year, that it is leading to the graduation requirement, but it's not, I don't believe it's duplicating it. I do think you will see grade, I would be okay with keeping grade 12. It depends when you measure it, right? If we say we're measuring at the end of the year, fair point. I would argue we should measure grade 12 at the middle of the year, because there are students who are on the edge between January and June of their senior year. And so the 4-year graduation rate is one of the key metrics that is reported every year. And so the leading indicators are really important to me if we're going to use this. I agree there are other ways to measure career and college readiness. There's a variety of different metrics in terms of ACT, AccuPlacer. I even argue the ASVAB, the military readiness test, would be part of that. But when we discuss, there's a desire to think a little bit more broadly than those particular metrics. So as we are really wrestling with this, one of the things that you can expect to see likely this spring is for us to do some work to further align what these state required goals are and the benchmarks. If you remember, the benchmarks that we have were in alignment with what Northfield Promise benchmarks were. And we got a little bit lucky when the World's Best Workforce goals came out, that they were a nice fit at that time. But we are also trying about how do we simplify to provide clarity so that when people are doing the work each day, they know how their work connects to this broader set of goals, if that makes sense. So in this case, regardless of what you teach at the high school, you know how you're contributing to this particular goal, right? Because we're working on making sure students successfully complete the coursework. So you can expect to see, we've been wrestling with this, right? What's the right way forward? because if we have too many goals, then none of them matter, right? So we want to be able to come back to what are the core sets of goals. We don't think we should be duplicative. So if this is what the wisdom of the legislature says for Minnesota schools, we think that our local items should align reasonably with our own flavor on it. Of course, we get to determine a lot of that, but we don't want to have 3 different reports that go 3 different ways and don't tell anyone what is the direction that we want to go. So this is a great discussion because we wrestled with a number of things based on the feedback from Northfield Forward about what to present to you tonight.
Yeah, and there's 2 other things I just want to clarify. One is about that graduation rate. Let us not forget that students who are legally able to stay in school till they are 21 are counted against our 4-year graduation rate. We also have MDE's path of students, and if they enroll in Northfield and go to school here for a month, but we are the last Minnesota school on record, we're going to take the hit against our 4-year rate if they unenroll and we don't know where they went, right? So there's little things that count in that 4-year graduation rate that would cause it to be different from that on track rate. And then the other thing, the biggest thing to me that is missing from here that was in World's Best Workforce is 3rd grade reading. And here we are, all in on the READ Act, and we all know how important that skill is. But they have moved that now to the local literacy plan, which doesn't get near the public press that this does, right? So we have discussed it a lot because 3rd grade reading is still a super important metric to us, and we want to keep that at the top of everybody's mind as well, even though it's no longer included in the CACR goals.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. I think to your point in terms of graduation rate, and I mean, there's different ways, right? It's the tyranny of math, right? And the way the calculation is done in some ways. But I think to Matt's point, it's how you see as a district or somebody that teaches in the district, how do you look at those goals and sort of see how that drives, your motivation and actions within the classroom and as an educator, and I do think, to that point, it's worth considering, right? Are there other measures here in terms of graduation's one outcome, proficiency's another, certainly as we look at not just did we learn something, but how well did we learn it, and how do you take that out in terms of career and college readiness? But no, it's a good conversation. I appreciate it.
Okay, Jenny?
Thanks, Claudia. I just wanted to kind of hitch on to Dr. Hillman's perspective and point about the career and college readiness goal. Because in our committee, of course, I muddied the water a little again, and I did ask, wouldn't it be easier if MDE could separate, or if we had two separate goals for this, so one career being career and one being college readiness. And Hope was nice enough to remind me that, this is what the state requires of us. And not only that, but also the state gives us the parameters that we were talking about before. And so we have to hit on all of those and stay within those. And also, come up with this metric for what should actually be, in my opinion, 2 separate goals. And maybe that's where the difficulty comes from. I sure know that was difficult for me. Maybe I'm the only one, but I just definitely wanted to mention that perspective.
Can I add one thing to Jenny's comment? It is really valuable to have high school students on the Northfield Forward Committee. And so one of the things we talked about, because it did come up, like, boy, these are 2 different things, career readiness, college readiness, is like, hey, everyone should do a survey when they're in 8th grade about what they want to do. And those kids were adamant, like, no way. And 8th grade, you think X, that might change a lot by the time you get to 10th grade. So their perspective was super valuable. But they also felt like Jenny did, like, boy, these could be 2 very different things.
Okay, Amy?
In 8th grade, I was going to read books for a publishing house to decide which ones would get published, but
See?
that didn't happen. Anyway, I think Dr. Hillman has a really good point about the 12th grade readiness scores, if they're done earlier, like in January of the year, would be a very important forward-looking measure. Well, our graduation rate is something we kind of wait a year and a half or whatever to get that information. But along those same lines, my question is, do we compare the names of the people that we see as our students in their senior year of high school with the MDE list and look for people who might have fallen through the cracks somehow?
We do it kid by kid every year. And people wait for it. And we put it in a Google Doc, and I send one list to Daryl, and we send one list over to the counselors. For us, Northfield, thankfully, the numbers of kids who we need to follow up on are quite small. And so that does make it easier, but we do that on a student-by-student basis to make sure that all of our systems are functioning the way they should be. And I don't know if you remember, but back when the graduation rate became an accountability measure, we did discover some holes in our processes and have since, sort of tried to clean that up. And I think we do a much better job, but it really requires very careful tracking. And occasionally we continue to be surprised by who is this student on our list that MDE assigned to either the ALC or Northfield High School, and then we just have to start doing some digging and figure out what happened. But they get to call the shot, right? And it's those cases are generally related to kids who enrolled here for a very short period of time, but we are their last school of record.
And so when they enroll, do we have to fill out a form and confirm that they've enrolled so we know first? Or does MDE send us a list and say, hey, you have a new person enrolled?
No, they're after the fact. So MDE actually measures graduation rate on what is your incoming ninth grade cohort. So all of your ninth graders, they're going to track through, and then with the addition of new kids enrolling. But no, we don't know until we get that cohort. We track our own kids, and the high school and the ALC are really good about doing this student by student. But until we get MDE's list in anywhere from February to April, then we don't exactly know who they might surprise us with, actually. So it is pretty good. It's come a long way from the starting point of graduation rates being an accountability measure. But yeah, we do take a lot of time to look at that list.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I think over the years, I've always kind of remembered 95% as a target or whatever for a graduation rate. But I think, if you're picking, to me, I wouldn't phrase anything like that. I'd say, I want to give you 100% of what you need to do to graduate by June of your senior year. And if you don't make it by then, then because a lot of people, I've met so many people from even Northfield that got into substance abuse or family issues or depression that didn't graduate. I mean, and it's kind of like, so within that 95%, I mean, we're talking about statistics here and getting tagged with people, but these are, forget about all of that. This is a person's future. So if we're saying, hey, if we could give you 100% of what you need to do to graduate by June, I know when they leave, regardless of what happens, a lot of those names they're tagged with us or whatever school district that is. So how long do they have? And then what encouragement, whether it's GED or whatever it is, that we have to keep them engaged and encouraged to go finish.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your comment on that?
So I think I would like to say 100%. There's 4 codes you're going to get when you're either going to graduate, you're going to be a dropout, you're going to be an unknown, or you're going to be a continuing. And again, those continuing students are special education students who can legally stay in our school till they're 21, yet they count against this 4-year rate. So in any given year, we won't hit 100% because we have a subset of kids that stay in school till they're 21 and should stay in school until they're 21. The other kids, yes, we need to do everything we can, and we do. And I think the ALC, you know, we count every student that walks for the ALC as a win, right? And they may be helping and supporting kids who might have run into some challenges that make it difficult for them to graduate on time. But you know, 95%, I think, builds in as a district, remember, because Northfield High Schools has been higher than that. But as a district, it builds in that set of kids that is staying in school till they're 21.
I can just make a couple clarifications. One thing is we're all used to staying until 21, but there's a new law change that allows students to stay until they're 22.
Okay,
So,
22, I got to
because that's an
remind myself.
entire additional year of, and I think that that's important for a
Mhm.
variety of reasons. And Jeff, I couldn't agree with what you just said more. The 4-year graduation rate is the metric for what is the traditional time it would take to graduate high school. But as you said, we have numerous students who face challenges that would put most adults in the fetal position who need more time. And so I really am focused on looking at our 5, 6, and they will even calculate a 7-year graduation rate, because the resilience that it takes for someone whose friends that they grew up with, who they were in 3rd grade with, to continue on past what their high school date, you know, would have been the regular 4-year rate, is really astounding. And I think it is a testament to the work that the ALC staff has done. They have a very high rate of continuing to bring students back even after their traditional graduation date would have happened, and they do get students. And the celebration that happens when students graduate in that ALC timeframe after they're 18, you've all attended the ALC graduation, and I mean, we have a huge attendance because people are so proud. And so I think we have a system to get almost everyone, right? There's going to be a few people who we can't find, they're unknown, those kinds of things. And then I also want to highlight the great work that's happening at the NCEC with GED and with the adult basic education course, where depending on how old the student is, if they're past that time frame where they can use the ALC, they can still do the work and capture their traditional high school diploma. And so there's those multi-layer, it's our multi-tiered systems of support, but in that way. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. This is the 4-year graduation rate. This is what I think the average person on the street thinks of a graduation rate. But when you look at the 5, 6, and 7-year rates, we get very close to 100%.
Mm-hmm.
You have a, Amy?
This just made me think of outgoing exchange students who do it in the middle of their high school career. Do we have many of them? And if they come back and then have to add an extra year on to graduate, how do they fall into the 4 or 5 year approach?
So for instance, a student who leaves to go junior year abroad, they're still in that graduating cohort. And when they come back, they're either finishing in 4 years or they're not. So it depends on the student.
And I think it's important to remember for high school students in that circumstance, you can take extra courses, which many students in that case probably do, and be able to graduate in 4 years.
Mhm.
I think there'd be a good chance of that.
Having birthed one of those children, there's a lot of planning that goes into ahead of that junior year departure to make sure that the student knows and the family knows what they need to do to graduate when they get back as a senior, and the courses that they need to take. I think the high school counselors do a great job helping everybody understand what those requirements are.
Jenny, did you have a question? Anybody else? Rob?
Yeah. I guess this is probably the last time I'll have to keep track of all of these acronyms, but I find it very confusing that career and college readiness and comprehensive achievement and civic readiness are both CACR. So I wish that the MDE had come up with some other name for it.
We do too, Rob.
Well, and let's be clear, the name is not MD, that's legislative, right? So the actual name of the plan is legislative action.
Mm-hmm. We've had a lot of fun with it, though. I will say it's a little more exciting than World's Best Workforce.
All right, thank you, Hope.
All right, thank you.
Okay, item D is our policy committee recommendations, and Superintendent Hillman will present the policy committee's recommended updates to policies 103, 401, 402, 403, 404, and 405. This will be an item for individual action at the next board meeting.
Yeah, so I won't go through each individual policy. I'll certainly take questions on all of them. What we are now doing is we are past the point of taking care of the statutory policy changes, and we are back to our traditional review of policies, which we look at policies, whether they've been updated by statute or not, at least once every 4 years. That's the schedule that we have. We are looking this year mostly at the 400 series, which is really about employees, policies that cover employees. But you'll see that most of the policy changes that were recommended by the committee are really this point of trying to, in the purpose statement, explicitly connect the policy to the strategic plan in some way, shape, or form. There are a handful of other, what I would consider to be modest changes in some of the policies, but the vast majority of these were really about just making that explicit connection, as has been recommended by MSBA, to really try to customize that purpose statement to take what is more of a consistent policy and make it our own. So that's most of what is in the policy changes this time, but I'd be happy to answer any specific questions about individual policies.
Any questions or comments? Okay, Jenny and then Amy.
On policy 403, discipline, suspension, and dismissal of school district employees, we added, or you added, for those who belong to a union, representation will be offered. That was added. Can you just explain what representation means in that context?
Yeah, so first of all, even without being in the policy, union members have a right to the representation by a person from their collective bargaining unit in the discipline process if we believe there's a likelihood that discipline could occur from an investigation. So what that happens, what representation is a union member is allowed to have what typically is called a member rights advocate. So these are individuals who are well versed in due process. They're trained by the collective bargaining units. And what the member rights, and I think the union leaders would tell you this as well, the point of the members' right advocate, the representation, is to ensure that the individual who's being investigated or potentially disciplined has due process, fair due process. So they have a right to know what the accusation is. They have a right to be able to share their perspective on what the what the investigation is about. And it really is simply to make sure that someone who's in a fairly tough spot, right, if there's an investigation going on, that they have a trusted person who understands due process to make sure that they have their rights upheld. And so in this context, that's what it typically looks like.
And then on policy 103, concerns or complaint resolution, it's underlined process summary document. Was that document itself changed at all, or is it just underlined because of a hyperlink?
Yes, the procedures are underlined because of a hyperlink. And so we do have a procedural document that really reflects what board members would know as the chain of responsibility. So it really just gives a roadmap, if you will, for a person who has a concern or a complaint about the district of how they should proceed. And we know that we work very hard in this district to use the chain of responsibility. So you would go to the person that you have a concern with first. If you aren't able to bring it to resolution there, you may go to their supervisor. After that, you may come to the superintendent. It just outlines that method. And also connected with those procedures, we even created several years ago just a little document that a person can use so that they can take notes and document how they went through that process. So it's underlined because it is a hyperlink.
Thank you.
I just have a quick comment on policy 404 in the purpose. It talks about applying for employment with political subdivisions, including school districts. And I would like to suggest that we change the word to geopolitical subdivisions, because I think with our current culture, people think of anything to be a political party. And I think we're talking about a land area. So
Can you tell me which policy you're asking about again?
405 under
405. I'm sorry. I thought I heard you say 404. Okay, thank you.
under purpose. It's fourth line down.
All right, 405 veterans preference.
Yes.
Okay, and where are you looking? Oh, I see
Section
now.
one,
Yep, I
purpose.
got it. Okay, yep, okay. So I will check on that, Amy. The Veterans Preference Act, typically a policy like this, and I have to do a little more close reading to answer the question specifically. In general, with policies like this that are really taking a legal process and converting it into school district policy language, many times in a purpose statement, they will use language directly from the statute. And I certainly understand what you're saying. We're trying to remove that it isn't. I think when people read that political subdivision, I'm hearing you say they may hear it as partisan,
Mhm.
right? And that's not what it means, but I can understand why that might be the case. If there would be no reason why we can't do it, I don't have a problem adding that. We've just learned over the years to be very careful about adjusting anything that was included in a policy that had gone through the MSBA and MASA review process if it's intended to reflect statute. So I think your point is valid. And the question is, sometimes a valid point doesn't mean we should change the policy language if it directly aligns with what statute says. We will look into it. We will check in. We can also always check with Terry Morrow from MSBA to say, would it be a problem to add that word or that segment to the beginning? Prefix, there you go. I never thought of geo as a prefix, but now I do. So we'll look into it.
Thank you.
And on those, sometimes we have a section that's definitions, but that could be another route, right?
Yes, it could.
Okay, anybody else questioned or comments on the policies? No? Okay, thank you so much. Okay, item E is the superintendent focus areas. Dr. Hillman will provide an update for his 2024-2025 focus areas.
So what I've provided for you in the packet is an update based on tonight, December 9th report, just giving some updates on progress toward each of the 5 focus areas. I'm not going to outline each one, but I will highlight one segment from each focus area. The first focus area is around mathematics curriculum. I really just want to congratulate Hope Langston, Ray Coudray, all the math leads who have really been working hard to take the new Bridges to Math implementation process and keep it going as well as it has. I think for me, the game changer that we worked very hard to have happen is something that are called teacher lab days. One of the best pieces of professional development that teachers can do is watch other people teaching and discuss the instruction with each other. This has been a very hard thing to pull off in the past, and yet we had 66 teachers so far participate in these lab days in November. So it allows teachers to go observe someone else teaching this new curriculum, get ideas, give them feedback. It really creates this culture of adult learning, which we know is so critical as a precursor to student success in all academic areas, but specifically mathematics. The second one on the career and technical education school to work program, this is in its stages of development as we're looking toward trying to be able to include something in the next year's student registration guide. We're working through what are the hurdles or the check boxes that we need to do to be able to make that happen. Talk with Shane Byer, high school principal, about it this morning. But the highlight here is cultivating the relationship with those businesses. And you can see on the second page, we just had the Made in Northfield tour. This is, I believe, the second year that has happened on December 3rd. This was about helping students understand local career opportunities in manufacturing and healthcare. So 56 students. These were students from Northfield High School, the ALC, some recent graduates who participate in the Northfield Community College program, and students from Arcadia Charter School visited a variety of different workplaces, including things like Alina Clinics, Cardinal Glass, Engage Printing, Mechanical Systems. There was a panel at the end. So this is part of that work with the workforce development that we've been engaging in, and really pleased with that continued support from the Chamber of Commerce for that area. When we think about the first Northfield School District Leadership Development Institute, we've been taking time to be able to identify the specific themes. We've identified the themes as four sessions, 3 hours each. Leadership development, leadership culture, decision-making, and resource management. These are the areas that we would include in this first Leadership Development Institute. We are working to get that application available for people this month. Want to thank Rich Larson and KYMN Radio for an amazing partnership. We have realized our desire to have a podcast, and we have a full recording studio right there in downtown Northfield. And we have now produced 2 episodes, with a third one being prepared to be recorded in just the next week or so here. That is being standardized as the 4th Monday of each month. The educational campaign to inform the public about the November 5th bond referendum. I think I've heard enough bond referendum updates for me, and I can just yield the balance of the time on that one. And then our continued work to make sure that our friends and neighbors from demographic groups who we want to make sure that they're represented at the table, folks who maybe haven't always been represented at the table, are Black, Hispanic, and Indigenous students, especially their families. We have conducted Latino family engagement in October. We've had 1 Indigenous Parent Advisory Committee. Sybil Betzing, our Indigenous Cultural Liaison, doing an excellent job cultivating the parent group there. And we are have the Black Parent Advisory Committee meeting notification going out in the next week. Those meetings will begin in January. I've also listed a number of other updates, as has been the practice in the past with this report. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
For that, board members, any questions at this point? Amy?
I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the Massa Advanced Leadership Academy.
Yes, I'd be happy to. So the Minnesota Association of School Administrators is a statewide organization, mostly of superintendents. There's a number of other component groups: instructional leaders, technology leaders, special education leaders, and we have there's several different programs. There's the Aspiring Superintendents cohort, which I was part of the first cohort back in 2014. And so that is for folks who are interested in the superintendency. It's not a licensure program, but it's a year-long program that helps people be successful when they start the superintendency. There's the National Certification Program through AASA, which I completed in 2020. And that, again, is in for those people who have a little bit of experience, but are really coming into that, I would say, 4th to 8th year, of their experience in this role. So our organization, MASA, was seeking to strive another piece for people who are in my age range, if you will, people who are experienced superintendents who have completed these other programs and are looking to continue to develop their leadership skills. So this is a 15-month program, sets of 2 days at a time, and some virtual meetings. It's being led by Steve Murley, the former superintendent of Iowa City Public Schools, Green Bay Schools, former University of Iowa professor. Our first session in October was 2 full days on school leadership and artificial intelligence. So thinking about how we leverage artificial intelligence in all aspects of public school work. And so I've already come back and challenged our district leadership to see, could they be even more efficient by finding ways to include AI tools as part of how we lead the district and how we administrate the district. Is that good enough for now?
Jenny?
Thank you for the update on the second focus area regarding the School to Work program. Could you just explain what you mean by pathways in that last box? Pathways for hiring a credentialed work-based learning teacher?
Yes. So in order to continue forward with a work-based learning program, you're required to have a work-based learning licensed certified teacher. So we do have one of those people in place already, but that individual works solely with students who are receiving special education services. So in order to add general education students to that program, we would need to have capacity with a teacher who has a work-based learning vocational license, if you will. So it's a license through the state. Very likely at the beginning of this program, it would not be a large enough program where it would be a full-time equivalent. So we would likely have to try to invest in one of our existing staff to be able to help get the license so that they could have that as part of their workday. Maybe someday it would, we've looked into it's unlikely that we would be able to add the general education work-based learning component to the individual who is doing the services for students who are receiving special education services. That doesn't appear that there'd be the capacity in that role at this point. There's some other ways that we're looking at it, but we're looking at how would we be able to expand the number of people on our staff who have that work-based learning licensure so that they would be able to oversee the program.
Okay, thank you. And then in the third focus area, you state that there's going to be 4 sessions, or they're already scheduled.
There, we are working on the final scheduling.
Okay. And are those 4 sessions actually your key themes, which you list as the leadership, culture, decision-making, and resource management?
Yes.
Okay. And then you also mentioned application for credit. Is the credentials that the teachers or the staff receive to be used locally only, or are they able to take that to state level for the state licensing board?
So that's a great question. I think there are 2 things that are true there. Number one is that we have a provision of our teacher contract that allows the professional growth committee to designate certain local professional development experiences as being enough to where they could earn a graduate credit, the equivalent of a graduate credit, to move on the salary schedule. The second part that you're asking about, I would argue, is about continuing education units. And yes, they would be able to use these for continuing education units for renewal of their teaching license. I do want to point out that I think, of course, with teachers who are being that's the largest employee group that we have, but we would not limit the application to just teachers. We have a lot of people who are not in the teaching group, the teaching bargaining group, who we have a need for leadership in lots of areas. You see that on display. Our director of finance is an exemplary visualization of that, right, in terms of the leadership that Val provides. When we think about our director of buildings and grounds, child nutrition, there may be people in other units who would benefit from that kind of leadership development in those career ladders in those areas. So I do think the majority of people who will participate will be teachers, right? But we want to keep it open for everyone. In those cases, there aren't those same kinds of renewal credits, right? But it would be very helpful for people as they're moving up the career ladder in our district who have learned about the way that we facilitate meetings, the way that we set goals, the way that we work our cascading communication approach, how we come to consensus and solve problems.
So for the teachers, it would sort of almost be like a dual enrollment. They would receive the credit that they could use locally and state level.
That is correct. Should the professional growth committee determine that they would approve that credit at their meeting in January, I do think they will, but they only meet a few times a year. So the next time that they meet, they'll consider approving that credit. I don't see an issue with it, but we don't have the formal approval yet.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Rob?
I just have a question about the benchmark. I mean, no, sorry, the podcast,
Yes.
which says it's meeting the benchmark or addressing the benchmark. All parents report satisfaction with their children's educational experience. So I'm just wondering if there's a way of measuring progress toward meeting that benchmark. Do you have audience reactions or something that show that people are listening to this podcast?
I do not have that data as of yet, but we will get it because I know on the KYMN website, they have a detailed listing of, or they are able to get detailed data about who has listened to the stream. In fact, they'll even be able to tell if it came from a referral from our family update. So I'm been working with Logan to learn about when we link to that, are we able to see how many people clicked? In fact, I can even see in the SMORE how many people clicked the link to go to that. So I don't even need Logan's data on that, but that's all that behind the scenes web data. And that connection is that the theory behind the way we made that connection is that shockingly, sometimes children don't always talk about their teachers and the people around them, right, to their families. And so this is another way that we can expose families to the variety of different people who work in the school district.
Anyone else? Good questions, comments? Okay, thank you so much. Next, we have the construction update, number 2.
Construction update number 2. We are still working through a number of components and getting the processes set up. So what I will share with you this evening are a couple of different items. Number 1, we just were able to have the core planning team application close last evening. There are around, the last time I checked, there are around 65 people who have applied. Now what we're trying to do is just to put those into the different buckets of people who had applied in the different positions. And we may make some adjustments depending on how people, and there will be There are some stakeholder groups where only a few people applied and they're likely to be part of the mix. There are others where we had quite a bit of interest, and anyone who's not able to participate in the core planning will of course be invited to attend the Hopes and Dreams session that we have on December 17th. That's 6 to 7:30 p.m. That's for the general public to be able to give our team feedback about what they hope to see in the design. And of course, as you know, like we did with the Greenvale Park projects before, we involved a lot of people's feedback along the way. It's very heartwarming. I mean, this is not for the faint of heart. This is 8, Wednesdays that you have to come to one of these meetings and then attend the tours. So it was just so heartwarming to see so many people who are interested. So like we said, that just closed last night. We're starting to review that. We anticipate having notifications midweek so that people are ready for next week on the 17th. So that's exciting. And we included the schedule for board members again in the packet, just so you can see the definitions of what is the oversight team, what is the core plan team, what's the activities team, et cetera. I mentioned the Hopes and Dreams event that's coming up on the 17th of December. And then just a couple of other items. We are moving ahead with some of the basic provisions to start. So one of the first things you do with a project like this is you hire a company to do the surveying. That's everything from locating, different utility services and a variety of other different kinds of site analysis that they do. And so we did work with Wold, who got 3 quotes. We are going with Bolton and Mank to be able to conduct that site survey. And then the other thing that we've done is Xcel Energy has a program called the Energy Design Assistance Program. And so by applying to be part of that, they will provide some advice and some support on building design, in which we would then qualify for some substantial rebates. I'm not going to give you the number here off the top of my head tonight, but it's a way that we're being proactive, working with the utility provider to design a building, like you heard earlier, about trying to make it as sustainable and efficient as possible. So we are right where we should be right now in this process. I think people are, normally we probably wouldn't have even started in the core planning stuff until January, but people are chomping at the bit. And so we want to get people involved and maintain that excitement. So that is the construction report for this evening.
Board members, do you have any questions or comments? Rob?
So I've noticed on my walk every morning that there's some drilling being done at Carleton to explore the geothermal for some of the buildings at the edge of campus. And I'm wondering if there's any use of piggybacking on that for what we have to do for the high school.
Why, yes, there is. And so we're very grateful to several people in the community who alerted us to the Carleton. In fact, they're doing the Darcy well testing, which is technology that we have an interest in. And so Wold architects and engineers have been looped in with the folks at Carleton who are doing that. They're anticipate being able to share some of those results. Whether they're applicable to our project or not, we're not sure yet. But we do think that even just the experience of seeing the test wells being drilled is going to be helpful for the team. And the other part is we applied, we've been trying to find a vendor to do the test drilling for us for quite some time. The city of Northfield has provided $20,000 to the school district to fund that test drilling for the geothermal system through one of their climate action funding accounts. So if anybody wants a really good business opportunity right now is to be able to drill test wells for geothermal sites, because we can't get anybody right now yet until at least the spring to be able to do some drilling. So Wold continues to work on that. We'll learn from what Carleton is doing. And again, Carleton has been wonderful in being a strategic partner and helping advise us based upon what they learned from their geothermal experience.
Very good. Anyone else at this point? All right, we'll move on to item 6, which is our consent agenda. And as a reminder, there were some personnel items in the table file added to that consent grouping. Is there anything anyone would like to pull from the consent grouping for separate consideration? Okay. Is there a motion to approve the consent grouping? Okay, moved by Court, second. Okay, second by Ben. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item 7 is our items for individual action, and we have 2 routine items. Board members, make sure your mic is on when you are voting. Our first item is to certify the final 2024 payable 2025 tax levy. As a reminder, this action completes the school district's process that began in September with the preliminary levy certification to Rice, Dakota, and Goodhue counties and the Minnesota Department of Education. The district has reviewed and analyzed MDE's calculation and the school district's property tax base estimate by Rice, Dakota, and Goodhue counties. This levy, payable in 2025, will be a component of the 25-26 fiscal budget. I move that the board certifies to county auditors the 2024 payable 2025 final certified levy limitation and certification report in the amount of $27,740,323.16, which represents a 26.4% increase from the previous year. Can I get a second?
Second.
Second by Corey. Is there any discussion at this point? None. All right, then all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Next, item B is our fiscal year 2024-2025 general fund budget revision. Details of the revision are in the memo published publicly on our website. Director of Finance Val is available for questions. I'll make a motion and then I'll take a motion and then we can discuss. Is there a motion to approve the revised 24-25 general fund budget with revenues of $67,749,122 and expenditures of $68,341,666? Moved by Ben. Second?
Second.
By Rob. Thank you. Is there any discussion or questions at this point? None. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Next is our items for information. We have an enrollment report for December.
On the screen, I'm showing the enrollment report for December. You can see the totals and the data there. I think tonight you learned about the difference between what we see as this raw student count and the ADM in terms of the weighted student calculation. So we do focus on this, as you know, each month, just as a precursor or a way to try to keep tabs on this. So you see those totals there. And then I also just always like to pull up so that, especially at the elementary school level, board members can see current class sizes. So what's on the screen right now for you are the latest class size reports that we have from our Student Information Systems Department, and you can see those there. So this has been fairly consistent through this school year. Be happy to take any questions that people have.
Okay, Ben?
Just the C, remind us what that means on the.
Compañeros. So the C designates the Spanish immersion section at that grade level. And what you'll notice with that from time to time is you will see we do have those sections larger earlier on because compañeros begins in first grade, and there's inevitably some there's some attrition in that cohort. People move, maybe it's not exactly for them. The closer that we get as we go up in years, it becomes more difficult for students to join that cohort. So you'll often see the cohort be larger at the beginning and smaller at the end. That's not uncommon, but the C designates compañeros at each site.
Okay, Amy.
I have a question about Greenvale Park. Has their general attendance numbers gone up since the new school was built? I mean, do we now have more children attending that than they used to attend in the old building?
I would have to go back and look at the data. Amy, Val, do you have numbers that you can pull up on that right now?
Yeah, I just sort of remember them being the smallest.
Well, I think that your statement there is for sure, because just up until last year, Greenvale Park was the smallest school, right? And now we see Spring Creek for over a year has been the smallest school. I do feel that the enrollment has increased at Greenvale Park over the past few years, but it also would be less than what we saw when we have those real enrollment spikes in I would say the mid-2010s, the early 2010s, as we were getting ready to that peak in 2018, as Val had mentioned. So we saw, especially around when the development happened, there's that last round of development that really occurred in I would say the early to mid 2000s. Example, 22 kids used to get on the bus stop right in front of my house when Mike 10 years ago, now 2 get on, right? So that's just how neighborhoods change over time.
Thank you.
Anyone else? This time, okay. Next, we have a district committee meeting recap.
Yes, I just wanted to highlight that we tried something different in our continuous improvement model, our what's next mindset. We are always looking at how can we take some of our established systems and do them just slightly differently. So a week ago tonight, we attempted our first multi-committee evening, and most board members were able to attend. We had 7 different committees meeting simultaneously in this at the same time. We did this for the purposes of efficiency, so that people could, what I call, cross-pollinate between committees, which I witnessed firsthand at the end, members of different committees who would have never seen each other in the previous siloed example where one committee met on this day, another committee met on this day. So that was a very helpful piece. We have 19 survey results back so far after that meeting. And so far, people really did like the time. They felt it was something of use for them. They did give some good suggestions for feedback as we move ahead. And so this is part of that continuous improvement process. Advisory committees are designed to help school leaders and school board members hear the feedback from the community without them having to be technical experts. It's about what is your perspective, and that is intended to give us a base of knowledge that helps us make better decisions. So we do think that this really had some positive impact. Of course, board members who attended those committees can submit your committee reports in January, and we can hear a little bit more about them. We didn't have an exact count. We estimated there was probably between 70 and 80 people there. We had 100 chairs set up. Several board members who are very good at estimating gave me their estimates of what they thought they saw in the room. But the room was, when you looked around, people saw, oh, look at all of the people who are here giving feedback. And we think that that's an important piece when those committees operate in a silo. You look around the 9 or 10 or 15 people there, and here people were able to see all of the people on the different committees and how they were there to give their time to help them make the district a better place. So we look forward to the committee reports coming ahead in the next month, but I just wanted to give you the high level overview. The next iteration of this is on March 3rd. So we'll have some more before then, but I'd be happy to take any questions.
Yeah, I thought it was a good setup, a lot of great energy. It made it feel exciting to show up. So nice job. Anyone else comment or question at this point? All right, then we are on to item 9, our future meetings. We have our organizational meeting Monday, January 13th at 6 p.m. in this boardroom. That will be followed by a regular meeting. And then Monday, January 27th, another regular board meeting in this boardroom. And we'd like to also say thank you to everyone for your service this year. And we'll be welcoming a new board member in January and saying goodbye again to Rob Hardy. Thank you so much for stepping up and for helping us and for participating and bringing all your talents and your passion to the role. Yep. Okay, that is all the business that we have tonight. Is there a motion to adjourn? Okay, moved by Jeff. Is there a second?
I get it right here.
All right.
Second.
Moved by Rob. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, we are adjourned.